definitely tell the shocks and the springs are working. What's up, guys? Jeff with Shock Surplus here again with another install for you. This time around, we got the 2019 Ram 1500. This is the newer body style Ram. Truck currently has spring spacers and strut spacers on them, and we're going to be getting rid of that and throwing on these Bilstein 6112s. So let's put the truck on jack stands and get to it. All right, now that you got your truck on jack stands and you've taken your wheel off, it's time to give yourself a little bit of space in the wheel well to get working. First thing you're going to want to do is make sure there's enough play in the ABS line. We're going to be dropping down the control arm. So when we do that, you want to make sure that this ABS wire does not get pulled out or ripped. Once you have the ABS line loosened up and you have play in the ABS line, we're going to go ahead and use a 19 millimeter wrench to loosen the spindle from the upper control arm. Once you have the castle nut loosened, you want to make sure you don't remove that castle nut completely. You're going to want to take a hammer or a sledgehammer and hit the spindle to break the connection between the ball joint and the spindle. Once you have that loose, we're going to go ahead and remove the sway bar end link from the lower control arm and remove the tie rod from the spindle. So at the bottom of the control arm, you're going to see an 18 millimeter nut holding the sway bar end link to the lower control arm. You're going to want to go ahead and remove that. And you're going to want to push the sway bar end link up. Once you've got that loosened up, we're going to go ahead and remove the tie rod from the spindle. To get the tie rod off the spindle, you're going to take a 21 millimeter socket and break that nut free. And just like the upper part of the spindle, you're going to take your hammer and knock the side of this to break the connection between the tie rod and the spindle. Once you've gotten your tie rod and your sway bar end link loosened, you're going to want to take to 24 millimeter nut socket and loosen your control arm nuts. Before doing that, you want to make sure you mark your cams to the lower control arm mounts. That way you have some point of reference to go back to when you go and tighten everything back up. Once you have your lower control arm nuts loosened up, we're going to go ahead and remove the lower mount from the lower control arm. Once you have the lower mount removed, we're going to go ahead and move up to the top and remove the top nuts. Up top, you're going to have three nuts to remove for the strut mount. You can take I find it easiest to use 15 millimeter wrench to get these off. Now that you have the top nuts removed, you're going to want to take that, go ahead and remove that spindle or that castle nut from the upper control arm to the spindle so that you can move the spindle out of the way and then be able to pull the strut out. Now that you have your strut out of the way, you can go ahead and disassemble it and put your OEM top mounts onto your new Bilstein 6112 assemblies. All right, now that you got your assembly put together, it's time to go ahead and put it back into the truck. Now, what I like to do here first is I like to put the strut mount top plate on first, and then take your nuts and thread them on the nuts. That way, the strut assembly is being held on up top. Once you have your upper mount in place, you're gonna go ahead and position the lower mount into the lower control arm. Once you have your clevis saddling your lower control arm, go ahead and push the bolt through. Once you have your strut assembly in place, you're going to want to go ahead and remove this ABS line holder. Bilstein does include a new bracket. What that new bracket does is it moves that ABS line further out because these strut assemblies are so much bigger than your factory assemblies. This will just prevent anything from getting caught up accidentally. With the bracket in place, you're just going to take your ABS line and slide that grommet into place. Now that you have your strut in place, we're going to go ahead and take the spindle and connect the spindle to the upper control arm. And loosely thread on the castle nut. Take your tie rod. And put your tie rod into the spindle, thread on the bottom nut. And lastly, you're going to take your sway bar end length nut and thread that onto the bottom on the underside of the lower control arm. So down at the bottom of the lower control arm, you're going to want to go ahead and tighten up your sway bar end length to the lower control arm. When you have that tightened up, we're going to go ahead and tighten up the tie rod end. Once you've got that tightened down, then we're going to go ahead and tighten the castle nut to the spindle. Once you've got the castle nut tightened down, you're going to want to take your nut retainer clip and slide that through. And then you're going to want to go ahead and torque down your upper strut mount bolts and then your lower strut bolt. And then tighten your lower bolt. And take your ABS clip that you had removed first and pop that into place. And now we did loosen the lower control arm bolts. When it comes to tightening those lower control arm bolts, you want to make sure you torque those lower control arm bolts with the truck on the ground on its own weight so that the bonded bushings are at their most neutral position. And it prevents there from being any extra wear and tear on the bushings. But once you've gotten everything torqued down there, you're ready to put the wheels and tires back on and go for a drive. So there we have it. We just installed the Bilstein 6112s on this Ram. If you guys have any questions, shoot us an email, sales@shocksurplus.com, and we'll be more than happy to assist you guys.